Hey everyone, before we get into this episode, I want to let you know about my free guidebook called Music Production Essentials. It's a brief rundown of my top 24 takeaways that I've learned over the course of interviewing so many audio professionals for this podcast. So just go to secretsonics.co and you'll see the image. It's a totally free download, and I hope it helps you with your productions. Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 104 with Andrew Maury. I had a great chat with Andrew. We talked about so many things, including his journey from running front of house with Ra Ra Riot to having a mentorship with Chris Walla from Death Cab for Cutie. We talked about mixing major acts such as Shawn Mendes and Lizzo, his mindset when it comes to mixing, advantages of proper monitoring, avoiding burnout, mixing into the box, and so many other things. So I think you're going to love this conversation. So with all that to say, here's my conversation with Andrew Maury here on Secret Sonics. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Andrew Maury. Andrew is an American record producer, mixing engineer, and writer based in Brooklyn, New York. Andrew has worked with the likes of Shawn Mendes, Lizzo, Kimbra, Post Malone, JP Saxe, and many, many more. I first found out about Andrew on his episode of the Working Class Audio podcast a few years ago, and former guest of the show, Carl Bonner, actually mentioned him on his interview. And I finally got around to inviting him onto the show, and he's graciously agreed to join me here today. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Andrew.
Hello, Ben.
Yeah, so tell the audience a little bit about your story, how did music begin for you, and how did that transition into audio / all the other things that you're doing?
Yeah, so I grew up in a pretty musical household. My dad played in bands all through like the 70s and early 80s, I guess into the late 80s, yeah. So he kind of was like the band leader of this like crazy club band in the 70s, and then like a wedding bar mitzvah band in my early childhood. So I would as a 4-year-old, like end up at a sound check or whatever, like lights and fog machine and all that stuff. So like from a very early age, I was into sort of like music tech and music performance contexts, and got really into playing guitar. And I sort of ended up being one of those kids in high school, middle school, high school, and college who was in a band and like organized band events, and I had the PA system and the lights and all that kind of stuff. So I've always been into music and live performances, and I went to Syracuse University for college. It's kind of like a film TV program that I did for my major, but I ended up taking a bunch of recording classes and did a music industry minor. And basically have always been really into music and got into recording by the end of college, and then just started my career kind of in this whirlwind of recording small artists and touring, mixing live sound with a band called Ra Ra Riot, who I met in college. And
yeah, they're great. Yeah,
they were kind of like the coolest band on campus, and I loved them, still love them. They're really close friends of mine, but yeah, getting to go on tour with them at the beginning of their career was really exciting. And I don't know,
awesome.
Just kind of threw myself in the deep end and learned both live sound and record making. Yeah.
Amazing. There's a connection between you and Death Cab for Cutie and Chris Walla, at least, right? Is that true?
Yeah. I was a huge fan of Death Cab for Cutie going back into high school. And in 2009, Ra Ra Riot opened for Death Cab on 2 legs of a tour. So I was like a year into doing live sound, and here I find myself on tour with one of my favorite bands, like seeing them every night and meeting Chris. And it was a pretty amazing turn of events. And the kicker was that halfway through the tour, Chris and I kind of became buddies, and he invited me out to LA immediately after the tour was over to run the computer on a Tegan and Sara album that he was co-producing at Sound City in LA.
Oh, shit.
Before it sold and sort of went through a renovation, and before the Dave Grohl movie and all that.
Right.
So I got to see it in like its original form before it sort of was updated, to where it is now. But that was pretty damn cool.
Wow, that's amazing. Any lessons learned from Chris in terms of like production? Like
Oh my
what did
God.
he like give you? What was the inspiration and the mentorship there?
So much. I mean, he really kind of like, I could probably credit him the most for like what sort of like emerged in my mind as to how to do this work, Like, I just loved the records he had made. And then I was able to learn directly from him in some sense, like I would email him from time to time and like, ask him advice or like, what gear should I buy for this or this? He was just a really big resource for me. And kind of, yeah, just getting to watch him work too was really cool. It was only the first 2 weeks of that record, so it was like the bed tracking stage, but it was a live band cutting to tape and digital simultaneously. And yeah, it was basically watching them work out the arrangement live while recording, like kind of old school, proper studio style.
Amazing.
Which was an amazing thing to see in my early 20s as we enter this new digital era where like, that kind of has fallen away and people make music in their homes now. So getting that baseline of knowledge about just miking a drum set and like managing the artist and like a group of people in the studio and headphone mixes and it was an incredible experience.
Yeah, those basics I feel like are super important. Yeah. And it's awesome just to have somebody that you could email and ask, hey, like I'm thinking about buying this gear. What do you think? If you don't have somebody like that, you get lost in the interwebs and waste so much time. And
I mean, I did that too. Don't get me wrong. Yeah,
totally. The next thing I wanted to touch on was Shawn Mendes, because I know that was kind of a pivotal moment for you, and I think also for him. Can you talk a little bit about that story and tell the audience a little bit what happened there?
Yeah. So I've been working with a manager. His name's Ollie Hammett. He's now based in LA. He manages a couple of writer-producer types, one of which is the writer-producer Teddy Geiger. And Teddy produced that whole record, Shawn's third album. It's like a self-titled album. So, my manager's other client is heavily involved in this record and had been involved in records prior too. And my first shot working with Shawn was mixing the single There's Nothing Holding Me Back, which was kind of tacked on to his second album as like a deluxe version. But it was sort of like, I think, everyone was kind of rolling the dice on me at Island Records and in Shawn's team. Like, I didn't really have a big pop credit going into that, but we really cracked the code on the song and the hard work paid off and the song was a huge hit. And that kind of at least gave me the foot in the door to do this album that you brought up. But basically it was just, connections through the music industry and mutual friends and a bit of luck.
Nice. Well, that record is obviously a banger and did great and sounds awesome. So congrats.
Thank
you. Let's like fast forward, I guess, a little bit. Like, tell me about what you're up to these days, because you kind of hinted, in our email exchange before we got on the call that you're mostly mixing. Was that also pre-pandemic? What's been your transition?
Yeah, I think like as time's gone on, I've gravitated more and more towards mixing. I think it's what I do best, and it just kind of fits into like my ideal lifestyle, I guess, or like day-to-day experience.
As we get into our 30s, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm halfway in, but it's like
nice.
I did so much hustling in my 20s, touring for one. I mean, that's a draining experience. Wouldn't trade it for anything, but that and recording a lot of bands, it's a lot of hours in the studio, overdubbing, editing, having conversations about what we should and shouldn't do. It just takes an immense amount of energy. And the more I started getting into mixing and developing a reputation as a mixer, the more I was like, I really just love this line of work. And not to say that I don't produce anymore. I definitely do, but I'm just careful about what I say yes to and what I choose to get involved in, because, once you are involved, there's a massive responsibility to do a good job and you hold a lot of power. And I just want to make sure that I'm like the best of my capability for that stuff,
Wow, I so resonate with that. Just like when you are working with somebody, you got to deliver all the way. And that, like, I mean, I feel that responsibility. Sometimes it comes off as anxiety of just like, this is like, I have to, like, this is their baby and I have to do the best I can at the very least, to get this as good as possible. So when you say yes to the wrong projects, that's a real drag.
Yeah.
And
But you find a way to make it fun regardless, assuming everyone's getting along, and you just you fight through. And sometimes the most painful parts of the process end up being the things that you're kind of the most proud of in the end. At least I've found, like, just stuff where we really got stuck on a song, or like really couldn't figure out the recording technique for a drum set or something, and then you finally figure it out. Yeah, that hard work, is rewarded in the end.
Yeah, it's just satisfying to do something technically and artistically at the same time.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize that you were involved in the Lizzo record, and you actually mixed Jerome, which is a track I love, and won the Grammy.
Right.
Dude, that song sounds amazing. Tell me a bit about that mix. Like, what went into that?
It's funny. It was actually really simple. I got the Pro Tools session for mix, and it sounded great. It was awesome. And it was just sort of one of those like quality control type mixes, It was like, we're not going to not get this mixed, so like let's just make sure it's right. And it was really just about sort of enhancing the way the vocal and the drums hit, and just the way the whole thing operated in the context of being loud. I find with a lot of these like really good productions, kind of stuff at a high level, it's like the mixing is really just making sure that it's going to work when it's loud. Sort of the way the drums hit and the way the soundstage and the depth is sort of perceived. Often the rough mix is like totally the right balance, the right effects, the right style, but there's something about the presentation that feels a bit hazy. That was one of those mixes that was just about sort of clearing the air and like making sure it was going to work. So no heavy lifting. It's just, sometimes the right move is to not mess with it.
Absolutely. Well, I want to go deeper in when you talked about getting it presented nicely for loudness, because I feel like I have a vague idea of what you're talking about, but maybe you could even get more specific. And to that point, like, I noticed that there's something going on with your like drums and bass that pops out in a specific way that most mixes don't sound like. Your kicks are like the punchiest, and your bass is always able to kind of like jut out right in the right spot. Like, what are you thinking about? What are you trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to talk about because it's sort of a sixth sense I've developed. I think every mixer can relate to this, like with any skill set that you are improving on or sort of coming to understand. I think there's a lot going on in our heads that we don't totally know about as we learn things. But it's like I've just developed a sense of when there's transparency in the mix. And it's sort of like this, it's like a binary feeling. It's like, yes, there is transparency, or no, there's not yet. And so often when I'm mixing, I'm just sort of thinking about like the clarity of the soundstage. But it usually has to do with like fine-tuning the gain structure of the master chain and how it's hitting the limiter and how much density is added before it gets to the limiter, so the limiter doesn't have to work too hard, and what kind of tonal shaping is happening where in the chain. For example, like if you're boosting high end with an EQ in the master bus, like putting that EQ before a compressor is a very different sound than putting it after the compressor or like later in the chain. And that's like something that I would have totally just been like, it doesn't matter too much, like a long time ago. But I've come to hear those differences, and I think it's basically mastering, like what I'm describing is kind of like mastering speak, but as we all know, mastering work kind of has crept into the mix process in the last 10 years. And I take that part of the work really seriously. It's like, I gotta get this whole thing to feel right in this context. And maybe mastering can give it like an extra 5%. But
it's so funny because we are referencing masters, like when we're listening to other mixes.
Yes, it's a pretty crazy thing to do. And a lot of people will recommend that you not do that. And I totally see that. I think that's valid in certain contexts, but the bottom line with like pop mixing or mixing of any genre that's going to be marketed to mass audiences and played like in the car, on the radio, on the Spotify playlist, whatever, like, you gotta play the game. It's going to be loud. Things might be changing on that front, but I think we're still in it. So
it seems like it.
Yeah. But
like the algorithms are going to do what they're going to do, but people are still. I just spoke with Pete Lyman, who was telling me it's like, people say the loudness wars are over, but you just tell that to any of my clients, and they're like, no,
the thing
make
that,
it loud.
I think the thing that a lot of people don't talk about, some do, but it should be reiterated, and I kind of paid a lot of attention to this, is like the loudness gives you compression. It gives you density. It helps you to like compact the song and the sound